The future is a concept. It doesn't exist. As the proverb says, tomorrow never comes. There is no such thing as tomorrow. There never will be, because time is always now.
Welcome to the Philosophical Minds Podcast, the podcast about the stuff we wonder about.
We are here with author and researcher John Brisson, host of podcast Weve Read The Documents, as well as the Fix Your Guts podcast. Is it Fix Your Guts or Fix Your Gut?
Fix Your Guts, Guy.
Fix Your Guts. Okay. John, I'm glad to have you on. So welcome. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for having me on Philosophical Minds, Guy. I hope you're doing well.
Definitely. I love listening to you because you seem to be very fair-minded and evidence-based when it comes to the research you've done and the subjects you cover. You and Recluse are pretty hardcore readers, so I'm thankful for guys like you. I myself, I'm pretty terrible in that regard, to be honest. I guess, if anything, I consider myself an audio researcher. It's funny because I'm obsessed with books and documents, and me and my wife, we have a pretty extensive collection of old antique books. We've got a lot of really badass, like 1800s Bibles and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, I sit down
Sky,
to read.
I mean, real quick, you might find this interesting. I do majority of my research actually listening. I'm an audio. I do read. I have to read, but I prefer listening. So me and you are probably. I get most of my information from listening, whether it's audiobooks or podcasts or YouTube or whatever. But yeah, most of my information gathering is listening based.
Okay, that's good to know. I think a lot of people kind of frown upon it to some extent, but I retain a lot more personally by listening. But yeah, so I want to start with the hidden history of Iran Contra. This is something that you briefly mentioned and something I listened to you recently. So what's kind of the general known perspective on Iran Contra? And then let's talk about some of the lesser covered parts of Iran Contra that you're aware of from your research.
Okay, so the basis, I guess, to give a background of the Ron Contra Affair, occurred during the Reagan administration in the mid-1980s. So what was pretty much happening, I mean, there's a multiple, I guess, aspect front to Iran Contra. You have the drug running aspect from Latin America to the United States, different parts of the United States, but primarily one thing that was mostly covered in Gary Webb's Dark Alliance was the flow of cocaine, which would later be turned into crack in the ghettos in California. And so you have that aspect of it. You have the gun running aspect of it that was brokered by Israel, of us exchanging weaponry to arm the Iranians in their conflict with Iraq that was going on during that time period. And then you have as well the child trafficking aspect, which was discussed in the Franklin cover-up book by John DeCamp, as well as later told by Paul Bonacci, that there was an exchange of Nicaraguan contrabands between Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, Lawrence E. King, and Colonel Michael Quino were all together at a meeting. So there are the three. It's a multi operation with different fronts. When most people with Iran Contra just center on the arms trafficking aspect of things, which were the arms sales to Iran, but there was also drug trafficking as well, coming from Latin America that was being brokered, and human trafficking and child trafficking too as well, that was going on to fund the Contras, which are like this rebel group in Nicaragua, It was versus the Sandinistas. Sandinistas were backed by Daniel Ortega, who was the president of Nicaragua at the time. And the Sandinistas were also backed by the USSR to the Russians. So they were trying to make it seem like we had to interfere in many of these elections or power grabs that were going on in the various countries in Central America and South America during the 1980s to stop the spread of communism. But in a lot of ways, that could be farther from the truth.
Yeah, that's interesting. And definitely the child trafficking aspect is kind of an underlooked part of the whole thing. Now, I wanted to get your thoughts. I want to move on to something that I've been enlightened about recently due to your work as well as Stephen's. The CNP, or what you call the hidden right, the Council on National Policy, is that what this is?
Council for National Policy. Okay,
Council for National Policy. Can you tell me a little bit about the background about the Council for National Policy?
Yeah, and then also, to circle back, we could circle back to their involvement in the Ron Contra Affair, which is not really talked about. They were big. The Ron Contra Affair was a CNP operation. So most people probably listening have heard on the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. The CNP is like the right wing of the world order, kind of like your neo-feudalist Fabian socialist type organization, where the Council on Foreign Relations is more of your globalist, your United Nations type ideals organization that most people in the truth movement consider them to be, the boogeyman of all the world's ills, like the Bilderberg Group. And on the right, the counter to the Bilderberg Group is something that Recluse has talked a lot about, which is an organization known as La Circle. Mm-hmm. So, and look, I'm no fan of the CFR, no fan of the Bilderberg Group in the slightest bit at all. They are just as guilty as the CNP or La Circle are, the secret right, and you have the secret left, which is the CFR, the Bilderberg, and the Trilateral Commission. But one of the main differences between the two is that you can go on the Council on Foreign Relations website, Sky, and look at who's a member of the CFR. You cannot do that for the CNP, other than the leaked information that we have. And researchers and reporter covering their meetings secretly, getting trying to figuring out where the meetings will be held in the United States, because they don't publish when their meetings are either. In the leaked 2014 CNP member directory that was published by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which I'm no fans of the SPLC, but the CNP document stands. Obviously it's theirs. The CNP never made a statement that it was incorrect and it was not their membership directory. So there are certain leaks that we have of the CNP, and that's one of my main issues with the Council for National Policy, is that they are very secretive. Very few people have heard of them, and a lot of people within the truth movement, like Alex Jones, Joel Skousen, Jeff Rentz, these people have direct connections to the CNP, Paul Craig Roberts, or were CNP members themselves. So a lot of the truth movement is steered by the Council for National Policy or controlled by the CNP. So the CNP was founded in 1981 by many prominent people that you've probably have heard of in the past. Some names you may not recognize, some names that most people in your audience will probably hear of them or know of them. So you have Tim LaHaye, who was the author of the Left Behind series, and his wife Beverly LaHaye, which are very big in the Christian dominionist evangelical type movement in the United States that's occurred since 60s and 70s and onward. I myself am a Christian, but their form of Christianity I'm not too much a fan of.
Right.
So other members that were in the initial meeting on May the 19th, 1981 of the CNP were Richard Vogeri, Paul Weyrich, Nelson Bunker Hunt from the Silver Barons, the Hunt family. Charles Koch, everybody knows about the Koch family. So Charles Koch was a founding member. Joseph Coors, like your Coors beer. General John K. Seelob, who was in the OSS and a founding member of the Central Intelligence Agency. Dr. Cleon Skousen, who is the uncle of Joel Skousen. Joel Skousen goes on Rents and InfoWars Alex Jones a lot. The financier Robert Waring Stoddard, Phyllis Schlafly, America's grandmother. A lot of conservatives know about the Eagle Forum. Well, Phyllis Schlafly used to go to Craig J. Spence parties, who Craig J. Spence was running a brownstone blackmail ring with Lawrence E. King. You heard of the Reagan callboy scandal, Sky?
I have not.
Okay, so in the 80s, there was a scandal that erupted that was broken by Paul M. Rodriguez of the Washington Times, which the Washington Times was run by the Moonies, but Paul M. Rodriguez, which the Moonies have their own connections to the CNP, but Paul M. Rodriguez was a solid reporter, and a lot of the reporting that he did that was good, they kind of pushed him off to the side, and he ended his career in like a lesser-known magazine that was run by the Washington Times to punish him for him doing such good reporting. But there were callboys that were going into the Reagan White House very late at night that were giving tours and were being escorted by the Secret Service. It was like a sex scandal, but it didn't erupt. It didn't go anywhere. But it was tied to Craig J. Spence, who was in working with Lawrence E. King from the Franklin scandal, Franklin Credit Union scandal. It was kind of like this pedophile network, very similar to Epstein, that was going on during the 1980s. And was many members within the CNP were involved. It was kind of like a CNP pedophile brownstone network.
Now, when you say brownstone network, I'm not familiar with that term, brownstone.
Sexual blackmail. Sky.
Oh, okay.
It's just another word for sexual blackmail. Like the cameras in our Lex Wexner's mansion for Epstein. They had the same cameras. Craig J. Spence was throwing orgy parties. Underage children were there. Very sickening stuff that was covered in John DeCamp's the Franklin scandal, Franklin cover-up, and in Nick Bryant's The Franklin Scandal, both excellent books. Even though there is some questions that George from CabDev.org, another researcher, investigative journalist into this stuff, who I've had on my channel many times, Sky. We had some questions about DeCamp. Of what he was in that CNP Nexus too, and he may have taken some pictures of his underage teenage daughter topless getting out of a pool. So yeah, there's some questions about DeCamp's authenticity too. That if the Franklin Scandal book that he written was just a limited hangout. But I guess to circle back, Phyllis Schlafly, everybody thinks of her as like America's grandma on the right, good Christian value woman. Well, she used to go to Craig J. Spence parties quite often.
Now, you mentioned the Hunt family as well. Isn't there some CIA connections within that family?
Yes, the Hunt family too, as well. As being part of the John Birch Society, and in helping to start the John Birch Society in its infancy in the 1950s. The Hunts were going around hanging the wanted for treason posters against JFK, and there was a belief that the Hunts and the John Birch Society played a central pivotal role that is very not talked about a lot in the truth community, because John Birch Society, before the CNP, again has its hooks in the truth movement. That they were involved in help finance, or not all of it, but some of it of the JFK assassination. As well as the Hunts. Officer J.D. Tippett, he was found out through the JFK files that got released, I think last year, that he was the head of the John Birch Society in Dallas, Texas.
Now, can you give a little bit of background on the John Birch Society?
Yes. So the John Birch Society was started by Robert Welsh in the 1950s. I think it may have been the late 1940s, but I think it was the 1950s. He was a candy maker. He owned a candy factory in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Welsh did. And yeah, it was the late 1950s that John Birch Society was founded. So supposedly, according to Euston Smullins in his book Death by Injection, the Rockefeller gave Robert Welch, his funding for the John Birch Society. He bought his candy company for him, even though the Birchers say that did not happen. And the John Birch Society was kind of like the you can almost say it's like the beginning of the truth movement coincides with the John Birch Society. And through Josh Reeves' excellent documentary, The Spellcasters, you can also argue it was both John Birch Society and Scientology that birthed the truth movement. But the John Birch Society is kind of like a proto. Okay, so as far as the secret right is concerned, you have Fabian socialism that kind of gained major ground in Europe and in United Kingdom in the early 1900s. So then you have that, and then here to the United States, if you're doing kind of like a timeline of the hidden right, you have Fabian socialism, at least in the modern times, past 100 years or so. Mm-hmm. So you have Fabian socialism, then you have the America First being set up by the Regnery family in the late 1920s, early 1930s, being pro-Nazi, and Lindbergh also being a part of that, Charles Lindbergh being a part of its foundation. And actually there was John F. Kennedy was a member of America First when he was a youth. And so was, I believe, Gerald Ford. And then from there, you have the John Birch Society kind of coming off from what's left of America First, as well as the American Security Council, which Reclus has talked a lot about the American Security Council. And then from there, if you're continuing the diagram of the secret right, then you move on to La Cercle being the Bilderberg formed in Europe in the 1950s, and then you have the CNP being formed in 1981. So all of these groups have different interconnecting members throughout those years. And the John Birch Society, believe it or not, just like the CNP, did have members on the Council on Foreign Relations that later would join those groups too as well. So
now, you said Fabian socialism. Not familiar. What is Fabian socialism?
Okay, so Fabian socialism, I guess, just to give a short definition of it, it's like a soft socialism. Pretty much is akin to destabilizing a country using like reform, like gradual reform, instead of out like a socialist type revolution. Okay, so it's kind of like slowly turning up the heat in a frog that's in a pot of boiling water, and then the frog doesn't know that it's being boiled to death until it's too late.
Oh, okay.
So there's like the flag, the coat of arms for Fabian socialism is literally a wolf with a sheep tied around it.
Interesting.
A wolf in sheep's clothing. So Fabian socialist is like, it was a think tank started in, I believe, the late 1800s, sometime after 1880, in London, England, and really started to get its major groove in the early 1900s. Like I mentioned earlier. But yeah, the secret right a lot of them seem to have a lot of those Fabian socialist ideals. Like as a conservative, the tagline for conservatism is what is conservatism really trying to conserve? What are they really doing? What is the CNP who claims they're against abortion and claims that they're, for everything that you would think a political conservative would be for, right? Strong national defense, pro First Amendment, pro Second Amendment, anti-legal immigration, but are they really achieving any of those objectives? Just like people on the left could really argue, is the CFR really, achieving any of the strong globalist ideals and beliefs that many liberals hold dear? Are they, are they any closer to a United Nations type government or any closer to social cohesion and ideals in a country? It's all window dressing. The elite are going to do whatever they want to do. Right. And especially when you look into conservatives as a Fabian socialism type organization, Fabian socialist type organization, it makes sense why America's just progressively a socialist nation. So
Now,
and,
with the Jesuit connection and the CNP, does that come in through Los Raquel?
to some degree, you're talking about the Knights of Malta, Jesuit connections within the CNP. In and of itself, I mean, Steve Bannon, CNP member, very staunch, representing the Catholic orders, representing Rome. Josh Reeves talked about it a lot in his movie The Secret Rite Volume 1 and The Secret Rite Volume 2 on the CNP. All roads lead to Rome and the Jesuit connections within the Secret Rite. Yeah, I mean, they're numerous. I mean, there's many CNP members that were connected to Catholicism or to Rome or even to the Jesuits, just like you have them connected to both the Knights of Malta and this pseudo Knights of Malta, where they formed their own Knights of Malta known as the Florida Priory. Do you know who Rick Joyner is of Morning Star Ministries?
I do not.
Okay, he's like kind of like this New Apostolic Reformation type pastor out of South Carolina. He's a big part of that Florida Priory of the Knights of Malta, kind of like a fake Knights of Malta, almost like a Protestant Knights of Malta, so that actually got sued by the real Ecumenical Order of St. John, the real Knights of Malta.
Sovereign, or wait, no, I was thinking of the Sovereign Order of St. John, but
that is the Knights of Malta, the Sovereign Order of St. John. Yes.
Okay, that's the real Knights of Malta.
Yes, but you have real Knights of Malta members like J. Peter Grace in the CNP, and then you have these pseudo Knights of Malta members like Rick Joyner being the CNP nexus, or Lieutenant General William Boykin, part of this Florida Priory. Now, it's debated between me and Recluse, and more research needs to be done, is if the Knights of Malta suing the Florida Priory, is that window dressing? Are they really Knights? We don't know. It's tough to tell. But yeah, there are connections of the Catholicism and the Jesuits to the CNP, with many members being Catholic or having Jesuit ties, or Knights of Malta, or even pseudo Knights of Malta ties to them.
With the CNP, how many members would you guesstimate are a part of this organization?
There are more than 400 members from the 2014 leak.
Okay. Interesting.
I guess to circle back, can we circle back to the Ron Contra thing real quick?
Definitely.
Colonel Oliver North was a long-term member of the Council for National Policy, even up into the late 90s. And he would go to CNP meetings during the 1980s. Because have you ever heard of the Bolin Amendment that got passed, so that we were not, the United States was not able to directly fund the Ron Contra Affair, directly fund the Contra, should I say, Nicaragua, the Bolin Amendment.
No.
So the Bolin Amendments were put, I think, between 1982 and 1984 to limit government assistance to the Contras in Nicaragua. So for Reagan and the CNP to get around that, the Council for National Policy started to be the primary funders for the Contras.
Wow.
And Moon, too, Reverend Sun Myung Moon as well, was working to fund the Contras, too. So, Major General John K. Singlov, who I mentioned earlier, who helped found the Central Intelligence Agency, was an OSS member. He was a CNP member, too, as well. A member of the Western Goals Foundation. He obtained $100,000 from fellow members of the CNP during members to donate to the Contra resistance.
Interesting.
And you have AmeriCares as well. I'm pretty sure you've probably heard of AmeriCares. They were funding, they were, for the CNP, they were donating to the Contras as well. And on their board, they had Zbigniew Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski kind of represents that secret left, like the globalist organization. But you also had, John Peter Grace, who was a Knight of Malta, CNP, CFR member. He was a member of both. He was on the board of AmeriCares. Prescott Bush, George H.W. Bush's brother, and a Knight of Malta. He was also on the board of AmeriCares. Barbara Bush was on the board of AmeriCares. William E. Simon, who was a CNP member, Knight of Malta, Secretary of the Treasury under Richard Nixon, Chairman of the Nicaraguan Freedom Fund. There was a fundraising organization set up by the Washington Times in the mid 1980s. In AmeriCares, AmeriCares was doing a lot to help deliver supplies to the Contras and funding to the Contras.
Wow.
So the CNP, the Ron Contra affair was a direct CNP operation. No doubt about it in my mind.
No.
I mean, Oliver North was going to those meetings asking for money. Like, we actually have one of his speeches that was reported by who's the Blumenthal? Sidney Blumenthal used to be a reporter, and he actually wrote Oliver North's speeches down. Now, granted, look, the Blumenthals are a limited hangout. Even Sidney Blumenthal's son, Max Blumenthal, today is a limited hangout when he reports on the CNP. They're both controlled by the World Order. But it's still interesting that we have that speech.
With Max, I think his thing is moderate rebels or something along those lines.
Kinda, yeah. I'm not a fan of Max Blumenthal's reporting on the secret right. I think he leaves a lot of stuff out, like the CNP's broad, strong connections to Russia that have been covered on the Antidote podcast with Greg McCarran and Jeremy Roth-Kushel in depth. So, I mean, both the left and the right are completely in bed with Russia. Oh, Russiagate was just to kind of steer people away from that. So yeah, the CNP definitely. I mean, they were part of many different. I guess to finish up, many different operations. Ron Contra, the funding of the Afghan Mujahideen freedom fighters during the 1980s, El Salvadorian Civil War, supporting Augusta Pinochet during the 1980s, and Colonia Dignidad, which Recluses talked a lot about, Latin American drug trafficking, the Franklin scandal, NSLAW, Danny Casolaro and the Octopus, the funding of Al-Qaeda through the Antigua Bank, 9/11, which 9/11 was both a secret left and a secret right operation. The Project of New American Century, Sky?
Nope.
Okay. PNAC, the Project of the New American Century, pretty much wrote the blueprint for 9/11, and later you can say the blueprint for the Middle Eastern wars. Majority of them, not majority of them, about half and half were CNP, and the other half was CFR. So it's like them coming together for 9/11.
Now, does
the War on Terror?
Does PNAC have any relation to the Mossad? Is there any Israeli connection there?
I'm sure there is. Offhand, I can't think of any without looking at my notes on PNAC, but I'm sure that there are. There's many Russian connections just as much as Israeli connections to 9/11 too. George from Captive.org and I covered it on my stream 9/11 to 11/9, going after Dino Hopsicker's work. But yeah, there's many. I mean, 9/11 was CNP, CFR, United Kingdom, Israel, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, United States. I mean, there were many different interests that were involved in 9/11. So
now, if you were to sum up the intention of 9/11 and in a few sentences, I don't know if that's doable or not, but from your understanding and your research, I mean, how would you describe what really went on? I guess it'd take as long as you need, but I'm just curious your take on that whole thing.
That's a tough question. I mean, it's multiple reasons. Al-Qaeda was shutting down opium production in Afghanistan, so we had to get that going again. So, I mean, you got the opioid trafficking from the Middle East. You got that aspect of it. Stabilization of oil. I mean, the petrodollar is another. Destabilization of the Middle East for Israel is another. I guess a weird CNP aspect was for them to get hold of a lot of the ancient artifacts, biblical artifacts, out of Iraq.
I remember reading some news articles about that and being really disturbed at them raiding some places in Iraq. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Josh Reeves has talked about it a lot when he covers the CNP. But them doing that, and, it's like, why would they have any interest in a lot of these Sumerian artifacts as Christians, right? Mm-hmm. You think that, or Babylonian artifacts in the Middle East. But, they would take them back. And Very interesting. It's I can't figure that one out, but I do think that was at least. I don't think it was the main reason why they went, caused 9/11 to happen. I mean, you also have, if you're looking out of the Middle East, you have the increased surveillance state being put forth to the American citizens that happened after 9/11. With the Patriot Act being readily accepted by the American population. The money being made with Silverstein and the double identity policies on the World Trade Center, and I mean, there's multiple reasons.
So kind of win-win for multiple parties for multiple.
Yes, reasons. Yes, very much so.
Now, aside from Iran Contra and all the other historical ones you mentioned in relation to the CNP, what are some other sketchy shenanigans that the CNP are involved with currently that we can touch on?
The election of Donald Trump and majority of Donald Trump's administration being comprised of CNP members.
Now, Mike Pence, is he a CNP member?
He is CNP. Yes, he is.
Interesting.
I mean, if you want me to give a brief rundown of some of the bigger parts of his cabinet and administration that are CNP, I can do that real quick.
Please, yeah, that'd be great.
Mike Pence, Steve Bannon, Kellyanne Conway, Betsy DeVos, David Bossie, John Kenneth Blackwell, John Bolton, Becky Norton Dunlop, the Mercers, Jay Sekulow, who was part of his defense team, Ken Starr, Rudy Giuliani. People have spoken to the CNP but aren't members that are part of his administration. Nikki Haley, Alexander Acosta, Mick Mulvaney, Scott Pruitt, Michael Flynn, KT McFarland, Jeff Sessions, Rick Perry, Chris Christie, Reince Priebus, Peter Navarro, Sam Brownback, Larry Kudlow. I mean,
wow.
And there's more people too. I didn't even name. These are just the people that most people may recognize.
So. From your understanding, what are some of the goals of the CNP? What are they trying to accomplish?
Neo-feudalism, and guise it up as being a Christian state. They want divine rule by kings, and where they're the kings, they're the ones who are picked by God, which is dominionism.
I definitely can see that. I've heard a lot of fellow family friends in Christianity kind of being influenced by the Trump administration and kind of falling for a lot of that stuff. So that's definitely interesting. I
mean, I could read you the CNP, thing. They believe in limited government, traditional values, Judeo-Christian values, might I add, and strong national defense. So that's limited government, but for whom? For them or for us? You know what I mean? For the Kochs, so they can continue to, run a corptocracy, or limited, for them, but not for us. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And then simultaneously got Trump doing his new task force thing, trying to militarize that deal with the
Operation Warp Speed.
Yep.
Yeah, and with the CNP too as well, Sky. I guess modern you can think of is I guess things that have happened. The Tea Party movement.
Oh, okay.
Was co-opted or initially started by the CNP. It was definitely co-opted by the CNP. I could prove that. But starting, and the QAnon movement has very much ties to the CNP too, and so does currently during this time period Operation Gridlock.
Oh,
and the Liberate.
I wanted to ask you about Operation Gridlock. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So, with the coronavirus right now, it appeared that many of the reopen type movements that you have, and look, I'm no fan of the tyranny under lockdown that we are under currently right now. Do not get me wrong. Okay. And you can have the debate. There's a big debate going on of whether or not it's necessary or not. I'm, not the person. I'm not going to say the virus is fake. I believe the coronavirus is real. But there is a debate raging of the effectiveness of lockdown and social distancing and mask wearing and quarantine fatigue is real, Sky. I mean, it is what it is, So the thing is with the whole Operation Gridlock and Liberate movement, though there might be patriots who are out there, acting on their rights of freedom of assembly, to, they want to go back to work, they want to go back and live their lives. The problem is it's astroturfed. Operation Gridlock, which was having people protest in their cars, pretty much blocking traffic, which, the same people on the right used to complain when Occupy Wall Street, which I believe, just like the Tea Party, was a, genuine liberal protest movement. But it was also co-opted too, or even from the very beginning. Like, I guess I'm saying there was genuine people within Operation that were in Occupy Wall Street that wanted to fight against the banksters and their corruption, right? Mm-hmm. So, but they would block the traffic. They would block the traffic on the George Washington Bridge, and the conservatives and the people on the right, they would get very mad at those people and how dare they block, the emergency vehicles. But Operation Gridlock was doing the same thing. And the left were getting mad at the conservatives that were doing that. So people can't, they get mad at me because I'm conservative in many of my beliefs. And I'm like, come on, you guys, like, this is being funded by the Koch Institute, the DeVos family, and the Mercers, all CNP, among others. Ginny Beth Martin, who co-opted the Tea Party movement, she's running it. A lot of the majority of the domains, if not all of them, for the Liberate movement were registered by one single company in Clearwater, Florida, which had, CNP and Scientology. So this whole thing's astroturfed. Now you have genuine patriots who just want what they think is best for their country. But you also have funding by these nefarious groups latching themselves on to genuine protests. Like I saw with the Convention of the States, which was backed and funded heavily by the Kochs, them attaching themselves to American Revolution 2.0, which seemed to be a grassroots, from what I could tell, movement of people that were just upset and wanted to, protest. They wanted to assemble. The Kochs grafted themselves onto that. So
what do you think they're trying to do? Are they trying to instigate some kind of civil violence, or? I
believe that to be some case. Yes, they'll have either that, or they're trying to my guess is probably just that. It's just the civil violence aspect of it. They're trying to instigate. I mean, you saw the protesters with AR-15s,
Michigan thing.
Yeah, storming Whitmer's, the Whitmer's office in the Michigan Congressional Building. That's horrible optics, man. Like, I'm a Second Amendment activist, and everything, but even I know you can't be doing stuff like that. It looks bad to the majority of Americans. It don't look good. You're not going to win any sympathy. The only way we're going to win any sympathy is by doing it by their rules, wearing masks and social distancing. And when the cops do crack down on us assembling even by their rules, which they will do, that's how you win public opinion. You don't win it when the Michigan legislatures, school play or not, are wearing, bulletproof vests for their safety, and you're walking in with an unholstered AR-15 into a Michigan legislative building. It just don't look good.
Right. I'm all about protests, but, intimidating militias, that's a different story.
It just doesn't. It's bad optics, and optics do matter. Even when the Mockingbird media, the fourth state media, whatever you want to call it, and Fox News is just as controlled as CNN is, they're going to, you don't want to make it easier for you to look bad. It's silly. So.
Now, when you say Mockingbird media, what are you referring to?
Operation Mockingbird.
And can you elaborate on what operation?
The CIA having control over the media, being in bed with the media.
All right. Now, before we move on from the CNP, is there anything else important and notable that you want to touch on?
I mean, a lot of what goes on, Trump, administration, love him or hate him, and I voted for Trump, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't know what the CNP was at the time. The CNP is in control right now. What you're seeing is being done by them. The wars in the Middle East are still going on. I mean, we're bombing. We're now, bombing Yemen. Yay! The drug trafficking is still happening.
Right.
No one's getting arrested. Hillary Clinton, Obama ain't going to jail. Bill Barr is one of the biggest swamp dwellers that ever walked the face of this earth. He was, he advocated, to George H.W. Bush to pardon every single member of the Ron Contra affair. He said, even Casper Warburger. He said, in for a penny, in for a pound.
Right. Now, my question is, what would be the alternative? Is Hillary Clinton and Obama, are they CNP members as well, or
CFR, Council on Foreign Relations Trilateral Commission, the left side of the world order? Even though Hillary Clinton flirts with both, just like George H.W. Bush flirted with both, because Hillary Clinton was a member of the Fellowship. The family documentary, the Netflix documentary.
Yes.
They have ties to the CNP, very strong ties to the CNP. Douglas Coe was CNP. But yeah, I mean, she flirts with both.
So there's kind of a left and a right side of the world order. So we got Hillary and Obama kind of on one side, and we got Trump and the CNP on the other. Now, are these just kind of power organizations that are in place, and you think a lot of these politicians kind of just try to latch on to whatever they can to get into positions of power, or do you think there's actually some kind of battle going on between the two, or what's your take on all that?
I agree with Recluse in that it's kind of like the mob, and we don't know who's the godfather, or the families that are the families that make up the tippity top. Some people say the breakaway civilization. Some people who run things that we never know their names.
Yeah,
that might be possible. It may be people that we do know, like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and those type of elite families may be the ones at the top. I kind of look at the world order as a pyramid where you have the left and the right, and they all meet at the top. Like, there is single objectives that the New World Order as a criminal organization have to do, right?
Right.
Now, they may have squabbles between one another of how their objectives need, certain objectives may need to be done, or some might jockey for power and do certain things. But overall, when it comes to the major things like 9/11, they come together and they do as they're told. You know what I mean?
Have you heard of the Pesor family?
Not offhand, no.
Okay. Supposedly, I don't know this for a fact, but I was just listening to something recently. They're supposedly above the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. They kind of supposedly own the Federal Reserve. They own, when you go to the top of the trusts, and a lot of these companies, like big oil companies or energy companies like GE or PG&E, the Pesor, I'm not sure how to pronounce it exactly, but they're the members that are at the top, supposedly. Interesting side note, but
definitely send it to me when you get a chance. I'm very curious to see that.
I will do. So another thing I wanted to get your thoughts on was Brexit. Because I'm not sure how you view it. I heard you mention it a couple times. Who's behind Brexit?
Lasserkel.
Okay. Now, Lasserkel, not good. Brexit, I thought it was a good thing. The British people withdrawing from the EU.
Well, me as a civic nationalist, I agree with you. But it's how it was done.
Okay.
Similar to the election of Donald Trump, through mass manipulation of the media by Cambridge Analytica, which Neil Sanders has talked a lot about. Now, Neil Sanders and I will disagree. Him being against Brexit, me being for Brexit as a nationalist. But I do think it was very dirty of how they used mimetic warfare and on Facebook as a way to drive. Lasserkel wanted to the United Kingdom to exit, to destabilize the European Union. So it's kind of like this push and pull. It's like, choose your own hell. Do you want the globalists to win with a united one world government, or do you want, the neo-feudalists to win where, yeah, we're all, back to divine rule of kings and feudal states, They both suck in my opinion.
Yeah. So globalism versus neo-feudalism, it seems like. What is if you were to describe globalism and like what the globalists' ultimate end game goal is, what would that be?
The globalists want to unite. I mean, it's the same thing that every truther is going to say. And the CNP drives this narrative, and they're not wrong about it. I just, it all depends if they're all, in on it together and they really want it. If they're Fabian socialists and even the CNP wants it, they're just going to be more sneaky about it. All right. But so pretty much it would just be the United Nations. There would be no countries, no borders. The United Nations just controls everything.
Because I guess we do kind of have it to a certain extent.
Yeah. And I do think it will continue. I think even the United Kingdom leaving the European Union isn't going to, again, what if that's all window dressing? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
What if it happens, but, as Josh Reeves always says, what if they, have some sort of event that has to unify the world, like some sort of fake alien invasion, Serge Montes and Project Bluebeam, Werner von Braun's supposed deathbed confession. They had to fake an alien invasion to bring the world together to get their one world government.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not saying that everybody in the CNP, just like everyone in the CFR, they don't know the nefarious of what what their hidden group does. It's compartmentalized. All this is heavily compartmentalized. You even see compartmentalization in our own, United States government. So, but the people at the top, the real power players, the Kochs, the DeVosses, George Soros, the Gates. These people do know Rothschild. They know certain degree what's going on. Yeah. The higher up you are, the more you know.
Alrighty. Now, I wanted to switch gears a little bit. I'm curious, as a Christian, your thoughts on these ancient cuneiform tablets. From like the Library of Ashurbanipal. They seem to heavily correlate to many biblical stories. Yes. How do you kind of look at that stuff? Are you open to that, or what's your thoughts around that subject?
Does it go by another name? I think I know what you're talking about.
Well, they're like in the British Museum. I think they hold a lot of the tablets now that they got from the Library of Ashurbanipal and probably other places, but the cuneiform tablets depict, there's like the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example. There's tons of different stories that are.
You talk about the multiple interpretations of the creation story and the multiple interpretations of the flood that has been throughout centuries. Basically, that type of stuff, Sky.
Yeah. I'm just curious because I think from my understanding and looking into this subject, it seems pretty credible with guys like George Smith. I think he was one of the early Assyriologists that translated some of the cuneiform. And then after him, I believe it's like Stephanie Dawley, and then later you kind of get into guys like what's that one? Zachariah Sitchin, for example.
Yes, Sitchin is stuff that Reeves talks a lot about and everything.
Mm-hmm. I'm just always curious from a Christian standpoint because biblically you'd go to the Bible as that being your reference for the I guess the definitive truth of, or I don't know. I mean, that's
based off faith. I mean, I know Josh has covered that. Josh Reeves has covered that extensively in his work, Sky. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say. And he talked about Sitchin, and he's read Sitchin's books, and I've heard him on audio tape. Again, it's just by faith.
Mm-hmm.
You people, like you said, the Epic of Gilgamesh and the interpretation of the Great Flood, the Diluvian event. I mean, I just go based off of Genesis. I know of the other stuff. I mean, I used to be a Gnostic Christian many years ago, and used to read and the Gnostic Gospels, thinking that the church had hid away all this secret esoteric Gnostic knowledge. And I'm not now, man. I mean, once I started really studying theosophy, Albert Pike and Madame Blavatsky and really started drilling down on it, and I started following the work of Michael Joseph and really realizing that the Rockefellers pushed modern day Gnosticism through Elaine Pagels and funded a lot of it. And I was like, whoa, no one ever really mentioned any of this stuff, when I was, rejecting the church, and being like, I can't, they're hiding us all this secret information, right? I mean, you know about the Noetic Science Institute, I guess, to go off a small tangent, but it connects back to.
I do, yeah.
Did you know that there are numerous connections between the Noetic Science Institute, which Dan Brown talked a lot about in The Lost Symbol, kind of like where we get our modern interpretation, a lot of quantum mechanics and quantum theory coming from, has connections to the Council for National Policy, Scientology, and the Moonies.
Now, as a former Gnostic Christian, you must be familiar with the Nag Hammadi scriptures as well?
Very much so, yes.
Okay. Because I guess that's kind of where I fall right now in terms of my, I guess in terms of my understanding, that's kind of where I'm at with, I kind of lend some credence, but I'm obviously not as informed on a lot of these subjects. So that's kind of why I'm interested in getting, your take as somebody that was former Gnostic.
I mean, I always believed in the divinity of Jesus Christ because I was raised as a Presbyterian.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go down I hate using the term the rabbit hole, because then there's more, Alice in Wonderland, mimetic Masonry, Scientology, Operation Dallas. Look, I mean, I thought, I was told the church is hiding things from me. And look, I am no fan of the Catholic Church, okay? Especially once Constantine got involved in Council of Nicaea. I do think I look at the Christian church as a tree, and ever since Jesus' death, parts of that tree have died and become sick and died, okay? And you tried to graft to that tree in different parts to try to keep the tree alive. Some people may say Orthodoxy splitting off from Catholicism, or the Protestant Reformation as being such. But I mean, at this point, when you look at the Catholic Church being led by the Jesuit Pope Francis, it's dead at this point. Right? It's dead and ain't coming back. So you kind of fall into that trap once you realize that, like, the government's a lie and they're lying to you about 9/11. I myself, the church lied to you. There are these hidden books. You can get this knowledge yourself. You can, the Gnostics, they were persecuted by the church. The Cathars were persecuted by the church, and then I fell into that. I still believe Jesus was the Messiah, but I also believe that you could attain, afterlife. You can go to heaven through gnosis. I believe that the God of the Old Testament was different than the God of the New Testament. I believed in the demiurge. I believed in the archons.
Oh, okay.
And what reeled me back was when I started really studying theosophy, and when I started really, the origins of modern day Gnosticism and where it was coming from, and then going back and tracing back, Gnosticism in the past, and realized, the Cathars, which, the Gnostics put forth as being like, the evil Catholic Church exterminated them, and they were just, trying to do their own thing and free love and everything. No, man, the Cathars were doing a lot of things that, you know, the Sabbateans were doing. You know, they were committing large amounts of sin and doing horrific things. You know, and that's the reason why the Catholic Church, you know, wiped them out. So it's kind of like this push and this pull, Sky. I mean,
Yeah.
now, I mean, I've read a lot of, if not probably almost all of the Nag Hammadi library texts that I could get a hold of. And now coming back through that, I realized that it's another trap, man. Like, I especially, like I said, the noetic sciences being funded by the CNP, and the Rockefellers funding, you know, early Gnosticism, and then, you know, the prelude to the, you know, Gnosticism with like a modern Gnosticism with theosophy, and, you know, every of the works of, you know, Blavatsky and Pike, you know, pretty much painting, you know, the church in a negative light, and all the Gnostics back then in a positive light. And then, you know, what about Wilhelm Reich? How much do you know about Reichiism?
I know a little bit. I actually, something I'm really interested is ether physics, and well, he has a lot to do with orgone energy and ether physics and all that stuff. So that's my familiarity with him.
I used to be a fan of orgone until I started reading Wilhelm Reich.
Oh, really?
And then I found out that, when they were prosecuting, you know, when they, you know, the Reichians, they go, well, Wilhelm Reich was persecuted by the United States government, and they were really after him. Well, it turns out that Reich was molesting kids in his basement.
Wow.
And the whole psychological group was a big part of that. And when you actually read Reich's books, he talks about as an adolescent that he would become, I don't want to be graphic, aroused when he would, you know, be around his farm animals and see them mate, and he would touch his animals to make them have orgasms, and he would have an orgasm to completion.
Wow.
And then him talking about orgone energy coming pretty much from, and this is blasphemy, I wish I had the direct quote. Michael Joseph, I've read it too from Reich's books. Michael Joseph talks about it a lot in his Catholic Catholic series, that Reich pretty much saying that orgone energy comes from Jesus, but because of the innocence of the sexuality of children.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's all interesting and new information.
And I've never heard anybody talk about that. And I was like, man, is that real? And then I went to go read it out of Reich, and I was like, oh man, it really is real. You know, like no one about orgone energy talks about this stuff.
Yeah.
Reich was demented.
That's, wow.
When he was, you know, running out of towns, you know, and everything like that, it's because supposedly Reich and his group were watching children masturbate and possibly doing, among other things, in those basements.
Wow.
Very similar to what Alfred Kinsey was doing later on. So
that's pretty insane. So now, aside from Reich, you know, prior to Blavatsky, prior to Theosophy, prior to the Gnostics, prior to Nag Hammadi scriptures, now, I'm curious, do you think there could be some misleading information in terms of how these tablets are being interpreted? Because I mean, if you're taking the interpretations, and if somebody believes how they were interpreted, and they're saying, you know, the Anuna or the Anunnaki, I don't know if you're familiar.
Yes, I am.
From heaven to earth they came, you know, all these different translations. This is, before all of the theosophy stuff and everything else, because these date back to like the 7th century BCE.
Yes, of course.
Does that have any credibility in your eyes, or do you think maybe some of this is manipulated? Or
I know Josh Reeves, talks a lot about the Anunnaki and talks a lot about Inky and them being kind of like aliens, the whole Planet X mythology.
Mm-hmm. And then they would say, like the Wheel of Ezekiel, they would use the Bible and the biblical references to say that kind of supports the story of the ancient astronauts, which are referred to as the Anunnaki.
And the CNP will push the fallen angels, because there's a Protestant interpretation of Genesis 6, and there's the Catholic interpretation of Genesis 6.
Okay.
Where the sons of God, if you're looking at it from the Protestant lens, if you're looking at it through the sons of God were angels, mating with the daughters, the sons of God mating with the daughters of men. So the sons of God were your fallen angels. The daughters of men were like earthly females. But the Catholic interpretation was not that. It was the opposite, where the gods, the sons of God were like earthly. They were like, your kings, and the daughters of men were the Jezebel, because you have Jezebel talked about both in the biblical character of Jezebel, but you also have Jezebel talked about by Jesus in the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
So it depends on which interpretation you're looking at.
Yeah.
And whether or not, that plays into this whole Anunnaki, Ezekiel, alien, ancient aliens. I used to be fascinated with that stuff, Sky. But now I just see it just as another control mechanism. I mean, it's a huge, widely pushed show on the History Channel. I mean, George Norrie's on it from Coast to Coast AM. Coast to Coast AM is a major CNP platform. I mean, I don't know. It's weird, man. Like, it's almost like the interpretation of those tablets is a possibility for it. Just like you said, is it the true interpretation? People could argue the same thing about the Bible, its translation.
Yeah.
But I mean, it pretty much just boils down to faith. Is me as a Christian, and that the Holy Spirit has given me discernment. And I mean, that's pretty much just what it boils down to.
Well, I definitely value your perspective as somebody that's obviously done a heavy amount of research into a lot of these subjects. So I'm grateful for you.
I try to. I'm not going to say that I completely have grasped everything. I try to research as much as I can, just like you do, man. I want to, I appreciate you looking into all these things too as well.
Yeah.
And it's, we can't know everything, but I will say, through all the things in my life, whether it be being born, 2.5 months premature, or the miracle of my son, my second son, Abel, being able to, spit out a ventilator tube, even though he wasn't physically supposed to be able to. And
wow.
I've seen so much supernatural things happen in my life that I just can't deny God and Jesus, So it just boils down to faith. I mean, I can't really sum it up any other than that, Sky.
Well, it's beautiful. Now, final questions.
Yes.
Now, your podcast is called Weve Read The Documents. What are some of the most important documents you've come across that you find most intriguing or interesting or revealing in terms of things going on behind the scenes, or great evidence in regards to different forms of corruption, or just anything that you think people should be more aware of and look into? What are a few documents that you
That's an excellent question, Sky. I guess I could name some books for people to look into. The Witch Hunt Narrative by Rossi Chet, if you want a non-conspiratorial book on why Many of the sexual abuse scandals during the 1980s and 90s, at the bare minimum, children were molested in many of those cases, and the perpetrators were accurate in who they accused of doing said abuses. And so it gives you it's not a conspiratorial look. It's more of a doctoral work.
Can you repeat
into it.
the name of that?
Yeah, The Witch Hunt Narrative by Rossi Chet.
Witch Hunt Narrative.
Because majority of the book is McMartin, country walk cases. But it is from a non-conspiratorial standpoint. Like I myself with McMartin, I believe that, there was definitely, the children were being abused by well-known figures, probably governmental figures. But, the bare minimum, there's enough evidence that Raymond Bucky allegedly molested, some, if not all the children that he stand trial for. And the Witch Hunt Narrative, pretty much presents that as the case from a non-conspiratorial angle. Other books I mentioned earlier, the Franklin Scandal and the Franklin Cover-Up about the Franklin scandal that happened during the 1980s, kind of the CNP trafficking nexus that was a precursor to Epstein. Mm-hmm. Recluse's book that recently came out, Strange Tales of the Parapolitical.
Fantastic.
Excellent book. I guess that would be it for conspiracy. I'm trying to think of any. If you want to know an early book about the CNP, there's one called The Coors Connection by Russ Ballant.
How do you spell that? The Coors?
Coors. C-O-O. Now you're making me spell. Right. That's like one of the worst things I could do. C-O-O-R-S, like Coors beer.
Okay.
I think. Yes, C-O-O-R-S. Yes, like Coors beer. If you want to know about early stuff about the CNP, the FBI vault drops on the finders. Adolf Coors, who was the founder. If you want to know a little bit, hopefully I'll eventually be able to. I'm writing my book on the finders right now. Eventually, I'll hopefully be able to write a book on the CNP eventually. Health books that I recommend. I gotta think of a few of them. Dr. Ben Lynch's book Dirty Genes.
Dirty Genes.
Good book about genetics and how it affects our health. A very easy to understand book on the gut is written by some French microbiologist. It's a female. Let me look it up. It's a good book for a basic knowledge and a basic understanding of the digestive system. Gut, the inside story of our body's most underrated organ by Julia Enders. It's a good book.
Okay.
Jack Cruse's book Epi Paleo RX. Gerald Pollack's book on the fourth stage of water.
Phase of water. Definitely.
Try to think of other books. The Family, if you want to know the Christian Dominionism side of the CNP by Jeff Shurtett. There is a modern day book of the CNP, but
is it Jeff Charlotte?
I'm bad with the names. Let me see. You're probably right.
I think it's SHAR.
Charlotte. Yeah, you're right. Charlotte. Yes. Okay. Jeff Charlotte. As well as The Shadow Network by Ann Nelson. It's a book on the modern on the CNP, but it's more written from a liberal standpoint. She doesn't really get into more of the parapolitics side of the CNP that me and Recluse and Josh Reeves get into. So it's more on like them steering culture, but not so much about what I consider to be outright crimes like a Ron Contra or 9/11 or Franklin. Okay. But it's still a decent book if you want to know about modern day CNP to listen to.
Who are one or two of your greatest just overall inspirations, dead or alive?
Ooh. That's an excellent question. That's a toughie. First, my father, because he was a conspiracy theorist when I did not believe him. I was raised as a neoconservative. He passed away when I was 18 years old.
Oh,
I wish he was alive and well today for me to tell him he was right.
wow.
He's one of the reasons why I do this. Because once, you wake up, and you realize that you've been lied to, you want to tell other people that. You have that split moment where you can make a decision where you can go back and be a normie just like everyone else, or you can live with the burden of this knowledge for the rest of your life. What I mean, Scott? Now,
when you were, he passed away when you were 18, and
yes.
he was into conspiracy theories. What was he into?
The JFK assassination primarily, and aliens.
Okay.
I mean, the standard stuff that you would get. I mean, he was anti-Masonry. He was Christian too as well.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was a strong Christian. So Masonic conspiracy. He used to listen to Alex Jones and Bill Cooper and Coast to Coast AM. I remember listening to with him when I was a child.
Yeah, it's interesting because Alex Jones introduced me to a lot of stuff that kind of, what I would say, kind of woke me up.
Me too.
But now, I go to him every once in a while if I want to be entertained, and
me too. Me too. It's a CNP shill. He always has been. At least since the formation of his InfoWars website in 1999, when he's listing CNP sources for news like World Net Daily and Drudge. Alex Jones woke me up 2008. I turned on Coast to Coast AM because I used to listen to it with my father and had nothing better to do. And Alex Jones came on and told me 9/11 was a lie, and I went and researched it, and I couldn't prove him wrong.
Right. I think that's a lot for a lot of people.
So him and Gary Caradori, who was the investigator of the Franklin scandal, who was assassinated on his way back to Omaha, Nebraska from Chicago, and his son was in the plane with him at the time. They murdered both him and his son.
Wow. Gary Caradori?
Yes. He always fought for the truth. He did his best. Like he didn't initially want to be dragged into it, Sky. But once he found out that Alicia Owen and Troy Bonner and Danny King, once he heard their stories and realized that these were children that were being trafficked and molested and murdered by the highest levels of government, he couldn't turn his back on them.
Wow.
And it cost him his life. So,
well, where would you like to direct people to learn more about your work and what you're up to?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube if We've Read the Documents. You can find me on Weve_Read on Twitter. And for the health side of things, you can find me fixyourgut.com or fixyourgut on YouTube. And thank you very much, Sky, for having me on Philosophical Minds, brother.
Thank you. I appreciate it.